There are three worldly ways of looking at our blessed Lord. One, he is too divine for a corrupt religion. Secondly, he's too truthful for a pragmatic politics. And three, he's too pure for the sex maniacs. Each of these condemn our Lord to death. After his midnight arrest, the Sanhedrin called a meeting. They were not allowed to meet at night. But this was a very unusual case. That meant that in a great semicircle sat 70 men, plus one, the president, who was Caiaphas at the time, and his father-in-law, Annas. Now you can imagine with what great glee Annas must have seen our Lord brought into this courtroom. This is a religious trial, remember, not political. Because our blessed Lord had driven his 5 sons out of the temple. Now he was anxious to get revenge. The trial begins. Caiaphas says to the Lord, "Tell us about your doctrine and your disciples." Why did he ask that question? He was insinuating that our blessed Lord was a kind of a revolutionist, and that what he was saying publicly was not his real doctrine. Now Caiaphas wanted to hear really, what is your revolutionary philosophy? Who are your revolutionary followers? And our blessed Lord answered, "You have heard what I have said, and my disciples have given testimony of me." Seeing that he could get no information from our blessed Lord concerning a revolution, Caiaphas now calls witnesses. And the witnesses all testified concerning that word he used in the temple. "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it." But they could not agree as to what he said. So there was no way of condemning our Lord on the testimony of witnesses. As a matter of fact, there was no reason why he should have been arrested in the first place. So Pilate now, Caiaphas now, resorts to an oath. And every loyal Israelite was bound to answer when that oath was invoked. Caiaphas said, "I adjure thee, by the living God, that thou tell us, art thou the Christ, the Son of God?" "I am." And with that, Caiaphas reached over and picked up some ashes and sprinkled them on his head in testimony that he had heard a blasphemy. And then reached down and took his priestly robes and rent them from bottom to top, which he was bound to do whenever he heard a blasphemy. And he said, "He's blasphemed. He's guilty of death." One of the soldiers then struck our Lord on the cheek. Our Lord said, "If I have spoken ill, give testimony of me. If good, then why do you strike me?" That night he was subjected to punishment. They blindfolded him, asked him then to prophesy who struck him, hit him with sticks and amused themselves until morning when the civil courts opened. So now they bring our blessed Lord as a prisoner to Pilate. Remember, Pilate is the representative of the Roman governor, which is an authority. And the Jews had not the power to kill. That belonged to the Romans. They would not enter into the house of Pilate because that would have profaned them. So Pilate goes out to them, and seeing the prisoner, says, "What charge do you bring against this man?" They said, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have brought him to you." Pilate said, "Then judge him by your law." Now, when there's a change from one court to another, there is a continuity of charges. The second court does not take up another charge which the first court considered. Will they condemn our Lord of blasphemy? Of course not. What did this pagan Pilate care about their blasphemy? So they changed the charge. And they bring up 3 charges. They have found him perverting the nation, refusing to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he is a king. Pilate knew they delivered him up for envy. Did not take the first 2 charges seriously. Maybe he had heard our Lord saying, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's." But that third charge, that he was a king, that concerned the Roman government. So Pilate then brings our blessed Lord into his secret chambers. "Are you a king?" "I am." "But my kingdom is not of this world. For if it were, my disciples would have striven to have released me." Pilate was satisfied that he was not a revolutionist. Went out to the crowd, said, "I find no charge against him." They said he perverted the nation beginning at Galilee. Beginning at Galilee? That's another court. That is not my jurisdiction. That belongs to Herod Antipas of Galilee. And Herod Antipas was in Jerusalem at that particular time for the Passover. So Pilate was very happy he could get our Lord off his hands. He was in the Galilean jurisdiction, therefore he would go to Herod. Now Herod is the sensualist. He had abandoned his own wife, who was the daughter of King Aretas of Persia, and had stolen Herodiad, the wife of his brother Philip, and brought her to live in his great palace at Machaeus. John the Baptist had condemned him, and then Herod had murdered John the Baptist. Our Lord is now standing before a man who had defied every grace that God had ever given him. Sensualists kill the spirit. This man who was totally given over to the flesh was impossible of understanding the spiritual, for the flesh lusteth against the spirit. But Herod was very glad to see him. Hoped he'd work a few miracles. Maybe change water into wine. He asked our Lord many questions. our Lord refused to answer. When grace is abused too often, it ceases. Now Pilate and Herod were enemies. They had quarreled probably over the pool of Siloam and the tower that was being built, and had not spoken for years. Pilate had sent him to Herod. Now maybe this is reconciliation. So Herod decides to play a joke. In Rome, all the political candidates wore white robes. Toga candida. Toga candida meant candidate. So he robed our Lord in a white robe, sent him back to Pilate. This was a joke. Here's your king, look at him. He's a ridiculous figure. Now Pilate has him back on his hands. And Pilate said, well, I will give you a choice. I will take one of your criminals, Barabbas, and let you choose between the two. So he brought out Barabbas, who was a revolutionist, and our blessed Lord, and he said, which of the two will you that I release unto you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate could hardly believe his ears. So he said, well, I'll scourge him and let him go. He said to our Lord, why have you come? Our Lord said, to give testimony of the truth. And they who are of the truth hear my voice. Pilate said, what is truth? The pragmatist. What is truth? He took our Lord out again before the mob. Look at the man. Look at him. They said if he did not condemn him to death, they would report him to Caesar. That was enough. Pilate did not want to lose his position as procurator. He would not be reported to death to Caesar. And so our blessed Lord is told, I will deliver you over to them. Iad cruce. Go to the cross. Here he is, condemned on contradictory charges. He's too divine, he's too human. And condemned on contradictory charges, the only fitting punishment is the sign of contradiction, which is the cross. And our blessed Lord is led to his death. Condemned by religion, condemned by the state. He is too divine for some religious. He's too truthful for some statesman. He's too pure for the erotomaniacs. So he must die.